She sat at the Billionaire'S table by mistake and left with a proposal that would change her forever before we begin. Drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from. And once the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Oh, and make sure to follow our channel for more stories like this. Now, sit back and enjoy every detail. She knew she shouldn't be this nervous about a simple lunch meeting, but her rent depended on it. The autumn rain drummed against the windows of Le Bernardin as Rowan Carter pushed through the heavy glass doors, her phone clutched desperately in her hand, completely dead. Her green eyes scanned the elegant dining room, searching for a face she'd only seen in a blurry LinkedIn photo. Mr. Henderson, potential client, middle-aged, probably in a suit. Her heart hammered as she checked her watch. 23 minutes late. In New York's competitive freelance world, that was practically a death sentence. "Ma'am, do you have a reservation?" The maitre d' approached with that particular brand of polite disdain reserved for those who clearly didn't belong. "Yes, I'm meeting—" Rowan's words caught in her throat as she spotted him. A man in an impeccable charcoal suit, sitting alone at a corner table, checking his watch with the kind of patience that suggested he was used to being waited for. He had to be Henderson. Without waiting for the host, she weaved between tables, her wet boots squeaking softly against the marble floor, her portfolio clutched against her chest like a shield. "Mr. Henderson?" she said breathlessly, sliding into the seat across from him. "I'm so sorry I'm late. The subway was—" The man looked up and Rowan's words died in her throat. This wasn't a middle-aged potential client. This was someone younger, maybe late 30s, with sharp jawline and eyes the color of storm clouds. Eyes that were currently studying her with an intensity that made her want to both flee and stay perfectly still. "I think there's been—" he started. "Please don't fire me before I even pitch," Rowan interrupted, desperation making her bold. "I know I'm late, but I have some incredible ideas for your project. Affordable housing doesn't have to mean ugly housing." Heath Langford, though she didn't know his name yet, tilted his head slightly. In 12 years of running Langford Industries, no one had ever sat down at his table uninvited. No one had ever looked at him with such genuine panic mixed with hope, and no one had ever made him want to smile during a business meeting. "Affordable housing?" he repeated slowly. "The Brooklyn development, right? I know you probably have a dozen firms pitching you cookie-cutter complexes, but what if we created something that actually honored the community?" Rowan pulled out her worn portfolio, her hands shaking slightly. "Spaces that breathe, that welcome families, that make people proud to call them home." Heath leaned back in his chair. His lunch meeting with the Singapore investors had been canceled an hour ago, but his assistant had forgotten to update him. He'd been planning to leave, but now he was curious. "You have courage," he said quietly. "That's rare in this city." "I have rent due in 3 days," Rowan replied with a nervous laugh. "That's more common than you'd think." Heath's lips curved upward, the first genuine smile he'd worn in months. "Tell me about these breathing spaces." For the next 20 minutes, Rowan talked. About green courtyards tucked between buildings, about community gardens on rooftops, about how good design could transform not just structures but lives. She spoke with her hands, her eyes lighting up, completely unaware that the man across from her owned half of Manhattan's skyline. Heath found himself leaning forward, captured not just by her ideas, but by her passion. When was the last time someone had talked to him about making people proud of their homes instead of maximizing square footage per dollar? "The thing is," Rowan continued, sketching quickly on a napkin, "we always design for profit, never for people. But what if we could do both? What if indeed?" Heath studied the rough sketch she'd drawn. It was beautiful in its simplicity, revolutionary in its humanity. "You know, I don't think you're who I was expecting." Rowan paused mid-sentence, her pen hovering over the napkin. Something in his tone made her stomach drop. "What do you mean?" "I wasn't expecting anyone, actually." Heath's smile was gentle but amused. "My meeting was canceled. You're sitting at the wrong table." The color drained from Rowan's face. She looked around the restaurant as if seeing it for the first time, really seeing it. The crystal glasses, the pristine white tablecloths, the soft murmur of power lunches and million-dollar deals. This wasn't the casual bistro where she was supposed to meet Mr. Henderson. "Oh God," she whispered, starting to gather her portfolio. "I'm so sorry. I'll just—" "Wait." Heath's voice stopped her mid-scramble. "I'm Heath Langford, and I think you and I need to have a proper conversation." The name hit her like a physical blow. Heath Langford. The Heath Langford. CEO of Langford Industries, the man whose buildings defined New York's skyline, whose net worth had more zeros than she could count. She'd just pitched affordable housing to one of the richest men in America. "I should go," she managed, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. "You should stay," Heath signaled the waiter, "because I'm about to make you an offer that might just change both our lives." And in that moment, as rain continued to streak the windows and the scent of expensive cologne mixed with her drugstore perfume, Rowan Carter had no idea she was about to step into a world that would challenge everything she thought she knew about love, ambition, and the space between who we are and who we dare to become. Sometimes the biggest opportunities come disguised as our most embarrassing moments. Rowan's hands trembled as she clutched her portfolio, torn between bolting for the door and staying to hear what Heath Langford, the Heath Langford, was about to say. The restaurant suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker, as if the weight of his name had changed the very atmosphere around their table. "Mr. Langford, I really should—" "Heath," he corrected, his storm-gray eyes never leaving her face. "And you should hear what I have to say before you decide to run." The waiter appeared with practiced silence, filling their water glasses and setting down menus neither of them would read. Heath dismissed him with a subtle nod, the kind of gesture that spoke of a life where service was seamless and invisible. "You know who I am," Heath said. It wasn't a question. "Everyone in New York knows who you are." Rowan's voice was barely above a whisper. "You build the city. I buy the city. I develop the city. I profit from the city." He leaned forward, his fingers steepled. "But what you described in the last 20 minutes, breathing spaces, communities that honor their residents, that's not building. That's creating something meaningful." Rowan blinked, unsure if she'd heard correctly. "I don't understand." Heath picked up the napkin she'd sketched on, studying the rough lines that somehow captured more humanity than the $1 million architectural renderings that crossed his desk weekly. 3 years ago, I started a subsidiary, Urban Renewal Projects. I wanted to prove that profitable development and social responsibility could coexist. And her architectural curiosity was overriding her mortification. And I've been through 17 firms, 43 presentations, and countless meetings with architects who talk about square footage and profit margins. He set the napkin down carefully. Not one of them has ever mentioned making residents proud of their homes. The sincerity in his voice made Rowan's chest tighten. She'd expected dismissal, maybe even security. Not this. "I have a project," Heath continued. "Lower East Side, 12 buildings, mixed income, retail spaces. The community board has rejected every proposal for 2 years. They want something that respects their neighborhood's history while providing affordable options for families being priced out." "That sounds—" Rowan hesitated, afraid to hope. "That sounds incredible. It sounds impossible, which is why I need someone who thinks like you do." Heath signaled for the waiter again. "Have lunch with me. Really have lunch. Tell me what you do with 12 buildings and a community that's tired of being promised change that never benefits them." Rowan stared at him, searching for the catch, the punchline, the moment this would reveal itself as an elaborate joke. But Heath's expression remained steady, genuinely interested. "I can't afford to eat here," she said quietly. "Good thing I can." Heath's smile was gentle, not condescending. "Consider it a working lunch." For the next hour, over salmon she couldn't pronounce and bread that probably cost more than her weekly grocery budget, Rowan found herself talking with an ease that surprised her. Heath asked thoughtful questions, challenged her ideas respectfully, and listened, really listened, in a way that made her forget the designer suits and crystal glasses surrounding them. "The key is layered income integration," she explained, sketching on yet another napkin. "Not clustering affordable units together like an afterthought, but weaving them throughout the development. Children from different economic backgrounds playing in the same courtyard, sharing the same community spaces. The market-rate tenants might resist that," Heath pointed out. "Then we make the community spaces so appealing that resistance becomes irrelevant." Rowan's eyes lit up. "Imagine a rooftop garden where residents can grow their own food. A community workshop where the teenage daughter of a banker learns woodworking from a retired carpenter who lives 3 floors down. Story time in the lobby where every child belongs." Heath watched her hands move as she talked, creating invisible communities in the air between them. "When can you start?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Rowan set down her pen. When had she gotten so comfortable using his expensive fountain pen? And met his gaze. "Are you serious?" "I don't make jokes about business, Rowan." Her name sounded different in his voice, less casual than she'd expected, more personal. I'm offering you the lead architect position on a $12 million project. Your vision, your team, your chance to prove that good design and community impact can coexist. I don't have a team, she admitted, her practical side finally catching up. I work out of coffee shops in my studio apartment. I don't even have business cards that aren't printed at Kinko's. Then we'll get you an office. A team. Whatever you need. Heath leaned back, studying her face. The question is, do you want it? Rowan looked around the restaurant one more time. At the power lunches, the deals being made over wine that cost more than her monthly subway pass. The world she'd stumbled into by accident. 6 hours ago, her biggest concern had been making rent. Now she was being offered the chance of a lifetime by a man who could probably buy her building without checking his bank balance. There's one condition, she said finally. Heath raised an eyebrow, clearly not used to conditions being placed on his offers. If I take this job, it's because you believe in the work, not because you were entertained by my mistake today. Her voice steadied with each word. I won't be your pet project or your charity case. I'll be your architect. The person who makes this vision real. For a long moment, they stared at each other across the table. Then Heath extended his hand, a gesture as formal as it was definitive. Rowan Carter, he said as she took his hand, feeling the calluses that surprised her on fingers that had clearly done more than sign checks. Welcome to Langford Industries. And as their hands touched for the first time, neither of them realized they'd just shaken on something far more significant than a business partnership. She'd designed homes for others her entire career, but had never felt more homeless than walking into that gleaming lobby. The Langford Industries building stretched 47 floors into the Manhattan sky, its glass facade reflecting the morning sun like a crystal monument to success. Rowan stood on the sidewalk, clutching her worn leather portfolio and a coffee shop cup that suddenly seemed embarrassingly cheap, watching people in $1,000 suits flow through the revolving doors like they owned the world. Maybe they did. You can do this, she whispered to herself. The same mantra she'd used before every job interview, every presentation, every moment when her dreams felt bigger than her courage. You earned this. The lobby was a masterpiece of marble and steel, with a waterfall cascading down one wall and security guards who looked like they'd been carved from granite themselves. Rowan approached the reception desk where a woman with perfectly coiffed hair and a smile that never quite reached her eyes looked her up and down. I'm here to see Mr. Langford, Rowan said, trying to project more confidence than she felt. I'm Rowan Carter, Ms. Carter. The receptionist's tone shifted imperceptibly, still professional, but warmer. Mr. Langford is expecting you. 32nd floor. The elevator ride felt like ascending into another dimension. Each floor that passed seemed to represent another tax bracket, another world removed from her studio apartment in Astoria. When the doors opened on the 32nd floor, Rowan stepped into a space that looked more like a high-end hotel lobby than an office. Ms. Carter? A woman in her 40s approached with a genuine smile. I'm Diana Walsh, Mr. Langford's executive assistant. He's finishing up a call, but I'm excited to show you around. Diana led her through a maze of glass offices and open workspaces, where people worked quietly at computers that probably cost more than Rowan's rent. Everything was pristine, efficient, intimidating. This will be your office, Diana said, stopping at a corner space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Mr. Langford wanted to make sure you had natural light for your design work. Rowan stood in the doorway, speechless. The office was larger than her entire apartment, with a drafting table, a computer setup that looked like it belonged in NASA, and a view that made her heart skip. There's been a mistake. I can't possibly. No mistake, a familiar voice said behind her. She turned to find Heath approaching, looking perfectly at home in this temple of corporate success. He wore a navy suit that probably cost more than she'd made in the past 3 months, but his eyes held the same intensity that had captivated her in the restaurant. Good morning, Rowan. He stepped into the office, his presence somehow making the enormous space feel more intimate. What do you think? I think I'm going to wake up any minute now, she said honestly, then immediately regretted being so transparent. Heath's smile was understanding, not mocking. I felt the same way my first day here. My father built this company, but I still remember feeling like I was playing dress-up in his world. There was something vulnerable in that admission that made Rowan's chest tighten. How old were you? 24. Just graduated business school, convinced I knew everything about running a company. He moved to the window, looking out at the city below. Took me years to realize that feeling like you don't belong can be a strength. It keeps you humble, Keeps you questioning whether you're doing right by people. Rowan joined him at the window, careful to maintain some distance even though something about his presence made her want to step closer. Is that why you started the Urban Renewal Division? Partly. Heath turned to face her, his expression serious. My father built this company on the principle that profit was the only measure that mattered. Efficient buildings, maximum return, move to the next project. It made us incredibly wealthy. But wealth without purpose feels hollow. He gestured toward the city spread below them. Every building we put up houses people, families, dreams. Shouldn't we care about more than just the return on investment? Before Rowan could respond, Diana appeared in the doorway. Mr. Langford, the team is ready for the meeting. Right. Heath straightened, and Rowan watched him shift into what she was beginning to recognize as his CEO mode. Ready to meet your team? The conference room was filled with people who looked like they'd stepped out of architectural magazines. Perfectly styled, intimidatingly competent. As Heath introduced her around the table, Rowan caught the glances, the subtle assessments, the questions they were too polite to ask aloud. Who was this unknown architect? Where had she come from? What made her special enough to lead a $12 million project? Rowan will be presenting her initial concepts for the Lower East Side development, Heath announced, taking a seat that somehow commanded the entire room despite being identical to every other chair. For a moment, panic threatened to overwhelm her. These people had degrees from schools she could never afford, experience with projects that dwarfed anything she'd ever imagined. What was she doing here? Then she thought about Mrs. Rodriguez, who ran the laundromat on her block and had been displaced twice by improvements that made her neighborhood unaffordable. She thought about the kids who played in the small park near her apartment, making the most of a space that developers saw as wasted square footage. She thought about why she'd become an architect in the first place. Community integration isn't just about mixing income levels, she began, her voice growing stronger with each word. It's about creating spaces where people want to stay, where children grow up feeling like they belong somewhere, where neighbors become families. For the next 30 minutes, she talked about pocket parks and community kitchens, about how natural light could transform not just spaces but moods, about the difference between housing people and creating homes. The room was quiet, attentive, and when she finished, the silence stretched just long enough to make her wonder if she'd completely misread the situation. Then Dr. Miranda Hughes, the senior project manager, leaned forward. The community garden concept. How do you address maintenance and seasonal usage? Questions followed, technical and thoughtful, treating her ideas with the respect of professional equals. And slowly, Rowan began to realize that maybe, just maybe, she did belong here after all. As the meeting wound down, Heath caught her eye across the table. His slight nod was almost imperceptible, but it felt like the loudest applause she'd ever received. Later, as she packed up her materials and prepared to leave her new office, her office, Rowan caught her reflection in the window. She looked the same, but something fundamental had shifted. She'd been offered a chance to dream bigger, and for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid to take it. The most dangerous conversations always begin with the most innocent invitations. 3 weeks into her new life at Langford Industries, Rowan had established a routine. Arrive at 7:30 a.m. with coffee from the bodega across from her apartment, partly because it was better than the office machine, mostly because the familiar ritual kept her grounded in who she was before the corner office and the view of Central Park. She was reviewing blueprints when Heath knocked on her open door, looking less polished than usual. His tie was loosened, his sleeves rolled up, and there was something almost boyish about the way he held 2 coffee cups from her favorite shop downstairs. I brought reinforcements, he said, setting 1 cup on her desk. Figured you might need fuel for the community board presentation tomorrow. Rowan looked up from her drawings, surprised. In 3 weeks, their interactions had been professional, cordial, charged with an undercurrent she refused to acknowledge. But this felt different, personal. You remembered how I take my coffee? The words slipped out before she could stop them. Medium roast, splash of oat milk, no sugar. Heath settled into the chair across from her desk, a gesture that somehow transformed her office from a workspace into something more intimate. I pay attention to details. Is that what makes you a good CEO? Rowan asked, then immediately worried she was being too casual. Among other things. Heath's smile was easier than she'd seen before, less guarded. Though I suspect being a good CEO and being a good person don't always align. What do you mean? Heath was quiet for a moment, staring out her window at the city below. Last year we acquired a building in Brooklyn. Great investment opportunity, solid returns for our shareholders. It also displaced 47 families who couldn't afford the renovated rent prices. But that's not what you're doing with the Lower East Side project, Rowan said quietly. No, but it's what I did for 10 years before I met you. He met her eyes, and the honesty there made her chest tighten. Sometimes I wonder if trying to balance profit and purpose is just elaborate self-justification. Rowan set down her coffee, studying his face. In the fluorescent office lighting, she could see the weight he carried, the decisions that had built his empire and cost him sleep. What changed? You did. The words hung between them, too honest, too loaded with implications neither was ready to address. Heath seemed to realize it too because he quickly added, Your presentation, I mean. The way you talked about creating communities instead of just constructing buildings. But Rowan had heard what he'd really said, and from the way he avoided her eyes, she knew he'd meant it. The board meeting tomorrow, she said, steering them back to safer territory. Are you worried they'll reject the proposal? I'm worried they'll reject you. Heath's protectiveness was evident in his tone. Community boards can be territorial. They've been burned by developers who promised community benefits and delivered profit margins. I'm not like other developers. No, you're not. Heath's gaze returned to hers, intense and assessing. But they don't know that yet. And some people don't appreciate change, even positive change. Before Rowan could ask what he meant, Diana appeared in the doorway, her expression carefully neutral in the way that suggested she'd noticed more than she'd let on. Mr. Langford, there's someone here to see you. She says it's urgent. Who? Heath began, then stopped as a woman strode past Diana into Rowan's office. She was stunning in the way that made other women involuntarily check their reflection. Tall, elegant with the kind of effortless sophistication that spoke of old money and older secrets. Her blonde hair was styled in a way that probably took 2 hours to look effortless, and her designer dress cost more than most people's rent. Hello, Heath. Her voice was honey over steel, sweet with an edge that could cut glass. Vivienne. Heath stood slowly and Rowan watched his entire demeanor shift, walls slamming into place. What are you doing here? Can't an old friend stop by? Vivienne's smile was camera ready, but her eyes were calculating as they swept over Rowan. I was hoping we could catch up. It's been too long. Heath's jaw tightened. I'm in a meeting. Of course you are. Vivienne's gaze landed on Rowan with the precision of a predator identifying prey. You must be the new architect everyone's talking about. Vivienne Ashford, New York Social Register. The name hit Rowan like a physical blow. Vivienne Ashford, socialite, columnist, and according to the gossip websites, Rowan definitely didn't read during lunch breaks. Heath's ex-fiancé. Rowan Carter, she managed, standing and extending her hand with more confidence than she felt. Vivienne's handshake was brief, dismissive. How refreshing to see Heath mentoring young talent. Very charitable of him. The word charitable landed like a slap, and Rowan felt heat rise in her cheeks. But before she could respond, Heath stepped forward. Rowan is the lead architect on our most important development project, he said, his voice cold as winter steel. She's here because she's brilliant, not because she needs charity. Of course, Vivienne replied smoothly, but her smile sharpened. I'm sure she's very talented. The pause before talented suggested she meant something else entirely, and Rowan felt the familiar sting of assumptions she'd faced her entire career. Too young, too pretty, too unknown to be taken seriously. If you'll excuse me, Rowan said, gathering her portfolio with as much dignity as she could muster. I should prepare for tomorrow's presentation. She moved toward the door, but Heath's voice stopped her. Rowan. When she turned, his eyes held an apology she wasn't ready to accept. Don't let anyone make you doubt that you belong here. Vivienne's laugh was like crystal breaking. Oh, Heath, always the knight in shining armor. As Rowan left her own office, fled, really, she heard Vivienne's voice carrying down the hallway. We need to talk, darling. About old times and new complications. Standing by the elevator, waiting for doors that couldn't open fast enough, Rowan realized she'd been naive to think the biggest challenge in her new life would be designing buildings. Some foundations, it seemed, were much harder to build than others. She'd spent her whole life proving she belonged in rooms where she wasn't wanted. But this time, she wasn't fighting alone. The Lower East Side Community Center smelled like strong coffee and stronger opinions. Rowan sat at a folding table facing 30 residents whose lives would be directly impacted by her designs. their faces a mixture of skepticism, hope, and hard-earned wariness of developers bearing promises. Heath sat beside her, his presence both comforting and nerve-wracking. Every so often their hands would brush as they reached for the same document, sending electricity up her arm that had nothing to do with the PowerPoint presentation loaded on her laptop. "Before we begin," said Carmen Delgado, the community board chairwoman, "I want to make something clear. We've heard a lot of pretty words from developers over the years. Words about community integration and affordable options. But what we've seen is displacement, gentrification, and families who've lived here for generations being priced out of their own neighborhood." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Rowan felt Heath tense beside her, but she leaned forward, meeting Carmen's challenging gaze directly. "Mrs. Delgado, you're absolutely right to be suspicious," Rowan said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I would be too, but I'm not here to sell you anything. I'm here to listen, to learn, and to design something that serves you, not just the people who can afford market-rate apartments." "Easy words," called out an older man from the back. "What makes you different from all the others?" Rowan stood, abandoning her prepared presentation. "Because 3 months ago I was worried about making my rent in Astoria. Because I know what it's like to choose between groceries and utilities. Because when I design affordable housing, I'm not thinking about theoretical residents, I'm thinking about people like me." She moved around the table, closer to the audience. "Mr. Santos," she addressed the older man, having done her homework on the community leaders. "You've lived on Rivington Street for 43 years, right? Raised 4 children in a 2-bedroom apartment, sent them all to college working double shifts at the restaurant supply company." His eyebrows raised in surprise. "How do you—" "Because that's exactly the kind of story that should be honored in this development, not erased by it." Rowan pulled out her phone, projecting images onto the wall. "These aren't stock photos from architecture magazines. These are pictures of this neighborhood. Your bodega, your community garden, the mural the teenagers painted on the side wall of the laundromat." The room was quiet now, listening. "Every building in this development will have ground floor community space," she continued, passion replacing nervousness. "Not token gestures, real spaces. A child care cooperative where working parents can share resources. Workshop areas where Mr. Santos can teach woodworking to kids who've never held tools. Commercial kitchens where Mrs. Chen can expand her dumpling business from her apartment to something that could support her family." Heath watched her move through the room like she'd been born to this, speaking to each person as an individual, not a demographic. This was why he'd hired her. No, this was why he'd been captivated by her from that first confused lunch. "What about the market rate units?" Carmen asked, though her tone had softened. "How do we know this won't become another playground for people who can afford $3,000 rents?" "Because we're not building separate buildings for different income levels." Heath spoke for the first time, standing to join Rowan. "Every building, every floor, every hallway will be mixed income. The banker's daughter and the teacher's son will ride the same elevator, play in the same courtyard, grow up together. And if the market rate tenants don't like that," pressed a woman in her 50s, "then they can live somewhere else," Rowan said firmly. "This development is designed around community values, not individual preferences for exclusivity." The questions continued for another hour, technical, financial, skeptical, but increasingly engaged. As the meeting wound down, Carmen approached the table where Rowan was packing up her materials. "You know what I like about you?" Carmen said quietly, so only Rowan and Heath could hear. "What's that?" "You didn't promise us everything would be perfect. You promised us you'd try to do right by us." Carmen's smile was the first genuinely warm expression Rowan had seen from her all evening. "That's more honesty than we've gotten from developers in years." As residents filed out, several stopping to ask follow-up questions or share stories about the neighborhood, Heath found himself watching Rowan with something approaching awe. She handled each conversation with the same attention she'd given the formal presentation, collecting phone numbers and promising to stay in touch throughout the design process. "That was incredible," he said, as they finally walked to his car, the autumn air crisp against their faces. "Really? I felt like I was improvising the whole time." Rowan's relief was evident in her voice. "When I abandoned the PowerPoint, I thought you might fire me on the spot." "Fire you? Rowan, you just did something 17 other firms couldn't do. You made them believe in the possibility of change that actually benefits them." Heath opened her car door, a gesture that felt both gentlemanly and intimate. "You were extraordinary tonight." The sincerity in his voice made her chest tighten. As he drove through the city streets, the conversation flowed easier than it ever had, about the project, about the community, about their shared vision of architecture that prioritized humanity over profit margins. "Can I ask you something?" Rowan said as they stopped at a red light. "Anything." "Yesterday, when Vivian came to the office," she paused, unsure how to phrase the question without revealing how much the encounter had affected her. Heath's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "What about it?" "She called me Charity." The words came out smaller than she'd intended. "Is that what people think? That I'm here because you felt sorry for me?" Heath pulled over, parking under a streetlight, and turned to face her fully. "Rowan, look at me." She did, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "You are not Charity. You are not a pet project or a good deed or anything other than the most talented architect I've ever worked with." His voice was low, serious, threaded with something that sounded dangerously like tenderness. Anyone who suggests otherwise doesn't know what they're talking about. The space between them in the car suddenly felt charged, electric. Rowan was aware of everything. The way his collar was slightly askew, the scent of his cologne mixing with the leather seats, the way he was looking at her like she was something precious and complicated. "Heath," she whispered, not sure what she was asking. "I know," he said quietly. "I know this is complicated. I know there are 100 reasons why this is a terrible idea." "This?" Instead of answering, he reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "This. Us. Whatever's been building between us since that first day in the restaurant." And in that moment, sitting in his car with the city lights reflecting off the windows, Rowan realized that the most dangerous thing about working with Heath Langford wasn't the pressure or the publicity or the ex-fiancés with perfect hair. It was the way he made her want to risk everything for the possibility of something real. The morning after you almost cross a line is always the most dangerous, because now you both know exactly where that line is. Rowan arrived at the office 40 minutes early, hoping to avoid the awkwardness of running into Heath after last night's moment in his car. The memory of his fingers against her cheek, the way he'd looked at her like she was something worth risking everything for, it had kept her awake until 3 a.m., alternating between replaying the moment and panicking about what it meant. She was deep in sketching modifications to the community center plans when her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend Jessica. "Girl, you need to see this. Now." Before Rowan could respond, her office door flew open and Diana rushed in, her usually composed demeanor cracked with concern. "Rowan, we have a situation," Diana said, closing the door behind her. "Have you seen the New York Social Register this morning?" "I don't really read," Rowan began, but Diana was already pulling up something on her tablet. "Vivian Ashford's column. It went live an hour ago." Diana turned the screen toward her, and Rowan's stomach dropped. There, under the headline "New Money, Old Patterns When CEOs Play Savior," was a photo of her and Heath leaving the community center last night. But it wasn't just any photo. It had been taken through his car window, capturing the moment his hand had touched her face. The accompanying article was a masterclass in subtle character assassination, wrapped in the veneer of social commentary. Vivian had painted Rowan as an opportunistic unknown, who'd charmed her way into a position she wasn't qualified for, and Heath as a powerful man with a pattern of rescuing young women who reminded him of his humanitarian phase. "She makes it sound like I'm some kind of gold digger," Rowan whispered, reading phrases like "conveniently discovered talent" and "the latest in a series of charitable pet projects." "It gets worse," Diana said gently. "She's questioning the legitimacy of the Lower East Side project, suggesting that Langford Industries is using community development as a tax write-off, while the real money goes to the CEO's new protégé." The word protégé was loaded with implications that made Rowan's cheeks burn. Before she could process the full impact, Heath appeared in her doorway, his face thunderous. "Rowan, I'm sorry. I'm handling this." "Handling what? The article? Or me?" The words came out sharper than she'd intended, but the humiliation was making her defensive. Heath stepped into her office, closing the door behind him. "The article is lies and manipulation, and anyone who matters knows that." "Do they?" Rowan held up Diana's tablet. "Because according to this, I'm just another pretty face who got lucky with a powerful man's guilt complex. And you're the entitled billionaire who thinks throwing money at social problems makes him a hero. You know that's not true. Do I?" Rowan stood pacing to her window. The view that had seemed like a symbol of possibility now felt like evidence of her outsider status. Maybe she's right. Maybe I am in over my head. Maybe I don't belong here. Don't. Heath's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. Don't let her get in your head like this. She's not in my head, Heath. She's in the New York Social Register, which half of Manhattan reads with their morning coffee. Rowan turned to face him, and the pain in her green eyes made his chest ache. Do you know what it was like growing up always being the scholarship kid? Always having to prove I deserved to be in rooms where everyone else belonged by birthright? Rowan, and just when I think I've finally found a place where my work speaks for itself, where I can build something meaningful, she gestured helplessly at the tablet. This. Questions about whether I earned my position on my knees instead of at my drafting table. The crudeness of her own words made her wince, but Heath's reaction was volcanic. If Vivian thinks she can destroy your reputation to get back at me, get back at you for what? The question slipped out before Rowan could stop it, revealing how much she'd wondered about their history. Heath was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as he clearly debated how much to share. We were engaged for 8 months, 3 years ago. It ended badly. Badly how? She wanted to be the wife of Heath Langford, CEO. She had no interest in being married to the actual person. He moved closer, his voice softening. Everything had to be perfect for the cameras, the social pages, the charity galas. When I started the Urban Renewal Division, when I began questioning whether profit was the only measure that mattered, she called it a midlife crisis, said I was jeopardizing our future for people who would never appreciate the sacrifice. Rowan felt something cold settle in her stomach. And now she thinks you're doing the same thing with me. What I'm doing with you has nothing to do with Vivian, or guilt, or charity. Heath was close enough now that she could see the flecks of gold in his gray eyes. What I feel for you, Mr. Langford? Diana's voice came through the intercom, apologetic but urgent. The board members are here for the emergency meeting. Heath closed his eyes, frustration radiating from every line of his body. Send them to conference room A, I'll be there in 5 minutes. After Diana's footsteps faded, Heath turned back to Rowan. The board called an emergency session. They're concerned about the publicity affecting investor confidence. They want you to fire me. They want me to do what's best for the company. His smile was grim. Fortunately, I'm still the one who decides what that is. Heath, maybe they're right. Maybe I should step away from the project, let someone with more experience take over. No. The word was firm, final. You're not running, and I'm not letting you. We're going to finish this project. We're going to build something extraordinary, and we're going to prove that the best response to gossip is success. He moved toward the door, then paused, his hand on the handle. For what it's worth, last night in the car, I don't regret that moment. I regret that someone violated our privacy, but I don't regret the moment itself. After he left, Rowan sank into her chair, staring at her reflection in the computer screen. Her phone buzzed with texts from Jessica, from her mother, who'd somehow already heard about the article, from college friends who'd seen her name in the social pages. But it was the email that arrived 20 minutes later that made her hands shake. It was from Carmen Delgado, the community board chairwoman. Rowan, I just read the garbage in the social register. I want you to know that the community board stands behind you 100%. We saw who you really are last night. Someone who listens, who cares, who gets it. Don't let some bitter socialite with too much time and not enough heart make you doubt yourself. We believe in you. More importantly, we believe in what you're building for us. Fight for us. We're fighting for you, too. Carmen, as Rowan read the email for the 3rd time, something shifted inside her chest. Let Vivian Ashford question her qualifications, her motives, her place in Heath's life, the people who actually mattered, the families who would live in these buildings, the community that would benefit from her vision. They saw her clearly, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough to weather whatever storm was coming. Sometimes the best defense isn't explaining yourself. It's showing the world exactly who you are when the spotlight gets uncomfortable. The Langford Industries boardroom felt like a courtroom, and Rowan was clearly the defendant. 12 board members sat around the mahogany table like judges, their expressions ranging from concern to openly hostile. Heath sat at the head, his posture tense but controlled, while Rowan occupied the chair that felt like it was designed for the condemned. Let's be frank, said Richard Pemberton, the silver-haired board chairman whose family had been investing in Manhattan real estate since the 1800s. This publicity is a disaster. Our investors are asking questions. Our competitors are circling like vultures, and the press is painting us as either naive do-gooders or something much worse. The article was a hit piece, Heath said, his voice dangerously calm. Anyone who knows Rowan's work, The article was effective, interrupted Margaret Sterling, the only other woman on the board. Perception is reality in this business, Heath. Fair or not, Ms. Carter's association with you is now a liability to this project. Rowan had been silent for 20 minutes, listening to them discuss her like she wasn't sitting right there, but Margaret's words broke something loose inside her chest. With all due respect, Mrs. Sterling, Rowan said, standing slowly. I didn't ask for Heath's protection then, and I'm not asking for it now. The room went quiet. Heath shot her a look that was part surprise, part admiration, part concern. I know what you're all thinking, Rowan continued, meeting each board member's gaze directly. I'm the unknown architect who got lucky, who charmed her way into a position she doesn't deserve. Maybe I'm sleeping with the boss, maybe I'm just another pretty face with a compelling sob story. Ms. Carter, Pemberton began, but Rowan held up her hand. I'm not finished. Her voice was steady, clear, and completely unafraid. You want to know who I am? I'm the architect who got a 98% approval rating from the Lower East Side Community Board last week. I'm the person who spent 3 months walking those streets, talking to residents, understanding their needs instead of imposing my vision on them. She moved to the presentation screen, pulling up images that weren't part of the prepared slideshow. This is Mrs. Santos, who's lived in a 1-bedroom apartment with her 3 grandchildren since her daughter died last year. She needs space, but she can't afford to move. The image showed a woman with tired eyes and calloused hands. Our design includes flexible family units that can adapt as circumstances change. Another image appeared. This is Marcus, who's 17 and has never had a quiet place to study. His dream is to become an engineer, but he's failing calculus because he does homework in a kitchen that doubles as his little sister's playroom. The photo showed a teenager hunched over textbooks at a cluttered table. Our community center includes dedicated study spaces and tutoring programs. Rowan's passion was building with each slide, each story, each life that would be touched by their work. And this is Elena, who makes the best empanadas in New York out of her apartment kitchen but can't get permits to sell them legally. The final image showed a middle-aged Latina woman rolling dough. Our commercial kitchens will give her the opportunity to turn her talent into a legitimate business. She turned back to the board, her eyes blazing with conviction. So yes, question my credentials. Question my experience. Question whether I belong in this boardroom or this building or this company. Her voice rose slightly, passion overriding protocol. But don't you dare question whether I understand the people we're building for, because I am those people. I was Marcus doing homework at a kitchen table. I was Mrs. Santos worrying about rent. I was Elena with a dream bigger than my circumstances. The boardroom was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of Manhattan traffic. Rowan realized her hands were shaking, but her voice remained steady. Fire me if you want. Replace me with someone with an Ivy League pedigree and a trust fund who's never worried about choosing between groceries and utilities. She gathered her portfolio, preparing to leave with whatever dignity she had left. But know that when you do, you're not just replacing an architect. You're replacing the person who actually gives a damn about whether this project changes lives or just generates profit. She was halfway to the door when Heath's voice stopped her. Sit down, Rowan. She turned, expecting to see disappointment or damage control in his expression. Instead, she saw something that looked like pride. Sit down, he repeated gently. You're not going anywhere. Heath stood, addressing the board with the authority of someone who'd built an empire and wasn't afraid to defend it. Rowan is right, about the project, about the community, and about what this company should stand for. His gaze swept the table, challenging each member silently. We've spent years building profitable developments that no one remembers 5 years later. This project, her vision, could be something that matters for generations. Heath, Pemberton said slowly, the publicity will pass. Great architecture is forever. Heath's smile was sharp as a blade. And if our investors are more concerned with gossip columns than groundbreaking design, perhaps we need better investors. Margaret Sterling leaned forward. Are you prepared to stake your reputation on this project? On her? Heath looked at Rowan, who was still standing by the door, her chin raised in defiance despite the vulnerability in her eyes. I'm prepared to stake my reputation on excellence, he said quietly, and Rowan Carter represents the best of what this company can be. The vote, when it came, was closer than it should have been, 8-4 in favor of continuing the project with Rowan as lead architect. Not a ringing endorsement, but enough. As board members filed out, muttering among themselves about risk management and public relations strategies, Rowan found herself alone with Heath in the now empty boardroom. That was incredibly stupid, he said, but his tone was admiring rather than critical. Which part? Standing up for myself or telling a room full of millionaires that they don't understand real people? Both. And brilliant. Heath moved closer, his eyes soft with something that looked dangerously like tenderness. You realize you just declared war on half of Manhattan's social elite? Good. Rowan's smile was fierce, transformative. I was getting tired of playing defense. Heath studied her face. The determined set of her jaw, the fire in her green eyes, the way she stood like she was ready to take on the world. You're going to be extraordinary at this, he said quietly. At what? Architecture? At everything. His voice was low, intimate, loaded with implications neither was quite ready to examine. At changing the world, one building at a time. As they stood in the empty boardroom, surrounded by the detritus of corporate warfare, Rowan realized something had fundamentally shifted. She'd stopped asking for permission to belong and started demanding recognition for her worth, and judging by the way Heath was looking at her, like she was something rare and powerful and worth fighting for, she was finally ready to claim the space she'd earned. The most dangerous moment in any relationship is when both people stop pretending they don't want what's standing right in front of them. The charity gala at the Metropolitan Museum was exactly the kind of event Rowan had spent her life avoiding. 300 of Manhattan's most influential people gathered to write tax-deductible checks while wearing clothes that cost more than most people's annual salary. But when the Children's Education Foundation specifically requested her presence to discuss the community center's after-school programs, Heath had insisted she attend. You belong in that room, he'd told her that morning, adjusting his cufflinks with the practiced ease of someone born to formal wear. More than most of the people who'll be there. Now standing in her one good cocktail dress, a simple black number she'd bought for her college graduation, Rowan felt like an imposter surrounded by designer gowns and inherited jewelry. The museum's soaring ceilings and priceless art only emphasized how out of place she was. Champagne? A waiter appeared with a silver tray, his smile polite but assessing. Thank you, Rowan murmured, accepting the flute and immediately worrying about spilling on the marble floors. Well, if it isn't New York's most famous architect. Rowan turned to find Vivian Ashford approaching, resplendent in a gold dress that probably cost more than Rowan's car. She wasn't alone. 3 other women flanked her like a perfectly coiffed army, their smiles sharp as cut crystal. Vivian, Rowan said evenly, proud that her voice didn't shake. Ladies, Rowan darling, you look sweet. Vivian's smile was all teeth. So brave of you to show your face after last week's board meeting. I heard it was quite the performance. I heard you weren't there, Rowan replied with matching sweetness. How disappointing that you missed it. One of Vivian's companions, a brunette with the kind of aggressive highlights that screamed Upper East Side, leaned in conspiratorially. Is it true you actually lectured the Langford board about poverty? How educational for them. I shared my professional expertise about community development, Rowan said carefully. Something they seemed to appreciate, considering they unanimously approved my continued involvement. It was a small lie. The vote had been 8-4, not unanimous, but Vivian's eyes flashed with annoyance. Of course they did. Heath has always had a soft spot for charity cases. Vivian's pause was perfectly calculated, designed to cut. Though I'm sure your involvement brings other benefits to the project. The implication was clear, and Rowan felt heat rise in her cheeks. But before she could respond, a familiar voice cut through the tension like a blade. Vivian, still spreading gossip disguised as social commentary, I see. Heath appeared at Rowan's side, his presence immediately changing the dynamic of the conversation. He looked devastating in his tuxedo, but it was the protective way he positioned himself slightly in front of Rowan that made her pulse race. Heath, darling. Vivian's mask slipped back into place, but not quickly enough to hide her flash of genuine anger. We were just getting acquainted with your protégé, my lead architect, Heath corrected, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that made people reconsider their next words. And one of the most talented professionals I've ever worked with. How lovely that you can combine business with personal interests. The brunette's smile was venomous. Heath's jaw tightened, and Rowan could see him preparing to unleash the kind of verbal destruction that would be talked about in Manhattan social circles for months. But she placed her hand lightly on his arm, stopping him. Thank you for the conversation, ladies, Rowan said with dignity that surprised even her. But I believe there are people here who actually care about improving children's educational opportunities, and I'd like to speak with them." She turned away, Heath following, leaving Vivian's circle to whisper among themselves like the petty mean girls they'd apparently never stopped being. "I should have handled that," Heath said as they walked toward the museum's Egyptian wing, away from the crowd. "I can handle my own battles," Rowan replied, though she was grateful for his support. "But thank you for having my back." They found themselves alone in a corridor lined with ancient artifacts, the sounds of the gala muted by distance and stone walls. The lighting was softer here, more intimate, and suddenly, the space between them felt charged with everything they'd been carefully not saying for weeks. "Rowan," Heath began, then stopped, running his hand through his hair. "This is complicated." "What's complicated?" "This. Us. The way I can't stop thinking about you." His confession came out rough, honest, vulnerable in a way she'd never heard from him. "The way I want to protect you from people like Vivian, even though I know you're strong enough to protect yourself." Rowan's heart hammered against her ribs. "Heath, I know all the reasons this is a terrible idea," he continued, moving closer. "The company, the project, the fact that everyone will say exactly what they're already saying, that you got where you are because of me instead of your own talent. And what do you say?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I say, they can all go to hell." His hands found her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone with infinite gentleness. "I say that I've spent 3 years trying to feel something real, and then you walked into that restaurant and turned my world upside down." "I was supposed to be meeting Mr. Henderson about bathroom renovations," Rowan said, her attempt at lightness betrayed by the way her breath hitched. "Best wrong table in the history of Manhattan." Heath's smile was soft, real, completely different from his boardroom expression. "Rowan, I need you to know, whatever this is between us, it has nothing to do with your job. You earned that position, you're brilliant at it, and you'd still be brilliant at it if I disappeared tomorrow." "Don't disappear tomorrow," she whispered, and the vulnerability in her voice made his chest ache. "Not planning to." His forehead touched hers, and they breathed the same air in the space between an ancient Egyptian sarcophagus and the beginning of something that could change both their lives. "But I need to know, if I kiss you right now, am I going to ruin everything?" Rowan's answer came without hesitation, surprising them both with its certainty. "If you don't kiss me right now, you're definitely going to ruin everything." The kiss was soft at first, tentative, a question being asked and answered. Then Rowan's hands fisted in his tuxedo jacket, and Heath pulled her closer, and the question became a declaration, a promise, a truth they'd been dancing around since that first confused lunch. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Heath rested his forehead against hers. "We're going to get so much trouble for this," he murmured. "Good," Rowan said, echoing her words from the boardroom. "I was getting tired of playing it safe." And standing there in the shadow of artifacts that had survived thousands of years, Rowan and Heath finally stopped fighting what had been inevitable from the moment she'd sat down at the wrong table and changed both their lives forever. Love doesn't make everything else disappear. It just makes you brave enough to face it together. The photograph hit the internet at 6:47 a.m., posted simultaneously across 3 different gossip blogs with the kind of coordination that suggested professional planning. Heath and Rowan, caught in their kiss beneath the Egyptian artifacts, her hands fisted in his tuxedo jacket, his face soft with tenderness she'd never seen him show in public. The caption read, "Langford's latest investment, mixing business with pleasure." Rowan stared at her laptop screen from her kitchen table, coffee growing cold in her hands as she scrolled through comment after comment, questioning her qualifications, her motives, her integrity. The photo was beautiful and damning all at once. Evidence of something real turned into ammunition for people who'd never met her to tear apart her character. Her phone had been ringing since 6:30. First Jessica, breathless with excitement and worry. Then her mother from Ohio, confused about why her daughter was suddenly famous and whether that was good or bad. Then reporters, investors, colleagues, and finally Diana, with the news that sent Rowan's stomach plummeting to her feet. "The community board wants an emergency meeting," Diana had said, her usually composed voice tight with concern. "This afternoon, they're questioning whether the publicity affects the project's viability." Now, 3 hours later, Rowan sat in the same Lower East Side community center where she'd earned their trust, facing the same residents who'd believed in her vision. But the atmosphere was different this time, charged with uncertainty, disappointment, and the particular kind of hurt that comes from feeling deceived. Carmen Delgado looked older than she had 2 weeks ago, the weight of community leadership heavy on her shoulders. Rowan, we supported you because we thought you understood us, that you were one of us. I am one of you, Rowan said quietly, her heart breaking at the doubt in Carmen's eyes. Are you? This from Marcus's mother, a woman who worked 3 jobs to keep her son in school. Because the woman in that photograph, kissing a billionaire at a charity gala, she doesn't look like someone who worries about rent money. Rowan felt the familiar sting of not belonging, of being caught between worlds with no safe place to land. My feelings for Mr. Langford don't change my commitment to this project. They don't change who I am or where I come from, don't they? Carmen's voice was gentle but firm. Rowan, we've been burned before by people who promised to help us, then disappeared when something better came along. Rich boyfriends have a way of making people forget about projects in poor neighborhoods. That's not, Rowan began, then stopped. How could she explain that loving Heath made her more committed to the work, not less? That seeing the world through his eyes had shown her how rare it was to find someone who genuinely wanted to use wealth for good? The publicity is already affecting funding, said Mr. Santos, the man whose woodworking skills she'd mentioned in her original presentation. 3 of the investor meetings got canceled this morning. People don't want to be associated with scandal. The word hung in the air like an accusation. Scandal. As if love was something shameful. As if her relationship with Heath somehow tainted the work they were trying to do. I understand your concerns, Rowan said, standing slowly. And I understand if you want to replace me with someone whose personal life won't overshadow the project. Is that what you want? Carmen asked. Rowan looked around the room at faces she'd grown to care about. Children who needed safe places to study. Mothers who needed affordable childcare. Families who deserved better than the false promises they'd been given before. What I want doesn't matter, she said finally. What matters is building something that serves this community. If my involvement is jeopardizing that, then I'll step away. The silence that followed felt like a verdict. Then Marcus stood up, the 17-year-old who dreamed of being an engineer, who'd inspired her design for dedicated study spaces. With respect, Mrs. Delgado, he said, his voice cracking slightly with adolescent uncertainty and adult conviction. I don't care who Ms. Carter is dating. I care that she's the first architect who ever asked me where I like to do homework, and actually listened to the answer. Marcus, his mother began. No, Mom. You always tell me to judge people by what they do, not what people say about them. Marcus looked directly at Rowan. Ms. Carter came to our neighborhood every day for 3 months. She ate at our bodega, rode our buses, talked to our kids. She didn't send assistants or do surveys, she showed up. Elena, the woman with the empanada dreams, nodded slowly. He's right. My daughter Sophia asked her last week if she was going to disappear like the other developers. You know what she said? Rowan remembered the conversation. A 10-year-old with serious eyes asking adult questions born from disappointment. She said she was going to be here until Sophia was old enough to cut the ribbon on the community kitchen herself, Elena continued. That's not someone planning to disappear. Carmen was quiet for a long moment, studying Rowan's face. Are you in love with him? The directness of the question caught Rowan off guard, but she answered with the same honesty. Yes. And is he using you? No. The word came out fiercer than she'd intended. Heath Langford has never asked me to compromise my vision or my values. If anything, he's pushed me to dream bigger, to demand more for this community. Then maybe, Carmen said slowly, the question isn't whether you belong in his world. Maybe it's whether his world deserves you. The vote, when it came, was unanimous. Rowan would stay on the project, publicity and gossip and social page photographs be damned. But as residents filed out, stopping to squeeze her hand or offer quiet words of support, Rowan knew the real test was just beginning. Her phone buzzed with a text from Heath. Board meeting in an hour. Whatever they decide, we face it together. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again as he struggled to find the right words. Finally, I love you. Whatever happens next, I need you to know that. Rowan stared at the screen, her chest tight with emotions too big for words. She typed and deleted a dozen responses before settling on the simplest truth. I love you too. See you soon. As she walked out of the community center into the harsh afternoon sunlight, Rowan realized something had fundamentally changed. Not just in her relationship with Heath, but in how she saw herself. She was no longer the girl asking permission to belong in rooms where she wasn't wanted. She was the woman demanding space for the work that mattered, the love that was real, and the future she was brave enough to build. The strongest foundations aren't built on solid ground. They're built on the courage to keep building when everything around you is shaking. The Langford Industries boardroom had never felt smaller. Rowan sat beside Heath, facing a tribunal of 12 faces, some sympathetic, most calculating the cost of scandal versus the price of cutting their losses. Richard Pemberton had arranged today's emergency session with the efficiency of a man preparing for an execution. "The situation has become untenable," Pemberton began without preamble, sliding a tablet across the mahogany table. "3 major investors pulled funding this morning. The Singapore group canceled their partnership meeting. And this?" The screen showed a cascade of social media posts, news articles and opinion pieces dissecting their relationship with the surgical precision of a public autopsy. Headlines like "Power Play" or "Love Story" and "When CEOs Go Slumming" filled the display. "The company's reputation is being dragged through tabloid mud," continued Margaret Sterling, though her tone carried less venom than usual. "Our stock price has dropped 6 points since the photograph surfaced." Heath's hand found Rowan's under the table, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture of solidarity that steadied her racing heart. "What exactly are you proposing?" Heath asked, his voice dangerously calm. "Damage control," Pemberton replied. "Ms. Carter steps away from the project, we bring in Blackstone and Associates to finish the development, and you distance yourself from this situation until it blows over. You're asking me to fire the most talented architect this company has ever employed because she's in love with me?" Heath's words cut through the boardroom like a blade. "We're asking you to make a business decision instead of an emotional one," Margaret said, not unkindly. "Heath, you've built this company into an empire by making smart choices. Don't let one relationship destroy what you've spent 20 years creating." Rowan felt the weight of their expectations, their disappointment, their assumption that love made her weak instead of stronger. But something had shifted in her during the community meeting that morning, a fundamental recognition of her own worth that no amount of pressure could shake. "May I say something?" she asked quietly. The board exchanged glances, clearly surprised that she was speaking at all. "6 months ago, I was designing bathroom renovations for a living," Rowan began, standing slowly. "I was talented but unknown, passionate but broke, convinced that my dreams were too big for my circumstances." She moved to the presentation screen, pulling up images that had nothing to do with profit margins or stock prices. "This is what we've accomplished in 4 months. The first image showed the construction site for the Lower East Side development, already transformed from an empty lot into the skeleton of something extraordinary. This is the community advisory board we created, not as a token gesture, but as genuine partners in the design process." The next slide showed Carmen Delgado, Marcus, Elena, and dozen other residents reviewing architectural plans. And this, the final image, was a rendering of the completed project, beautiful in its functionality, revolutionary in its integration of economic diversity and community needs. "This is what happens when you stop building for profit and start building for people." She turned back to the board, her green eyes blazing with conviction. "You want to know what my relationship with Heath has done to this project? It's made it better. Because he challenges me to think bigger, to demand more, to never settle for good enough when extraordinary is possible." "Ms. Carter," Pemberton began, but Rowan held up her hand. "I'm not finished. You're worried about scandal, about reputation, about what the society pages think of your CEO falling in love with someone who shops at Target and rides the subway." Her voice grew stronger with each word. "But here's what you should be worried about: being the company that chose stock prices over changing lives." Heath watched her command the room with a mixture of awe and fierce pride. This was the woman who'd sat at the wrong table and changed his world. Not because she was beautiful or charming, but because she was brave enough to demand more from people who had the power to give it. "The investors who pulled out," Rowan continued, "replace them with people who understand that the best return on investment is a community that thrives. The Singapore group, find partners who care about more than quarterly reports." She pulled out a folder she'd brought from the community meeting. "Because while you've been worried about gossip and stock prices, something incredible has been happening. 3 other community boards have reached out, asking us to bid on their development projects. A national foundation wants to fund our community integration model as a pilot program, and the mayor's office called this morning to discuss expanding our approach citywide." The silence in the room was profound. Margaret Sterling leaned forward. "Are you saying this publicity has actually helped?" "I'm saying that when you do work that matters, people notice. The right people. The people who care about substance over scandal. Rowan's smile was radiant, transformative. We have a choice. We can be the company that gets scared when the gossip gets loud, or we can be the company that changes how development is done in America. Pemberton looked around the table, reading the faces of his fellow board members. The calculation had shifted, not toward scandal management, but toward the realization that they might be witnessing something unprecedented. What are you asking for, Ms. Carter? Full autonomy over the Lower East Side project, a commitment to the community integration model, and Heath's support to expand this approach to every development Langford Industries touches. She looked directly at each board member. Stop apologizing for doing something meaningful. Start demanding that meaningful be your standard. The vote, when it came, was unanimous, not just to continue the project but to embrace it as the future of the company. As board members filed out, their conversations focused on implementation rather than damage control. Heath found himself alone with Rowan in the now empty boardroom. He began, then shook his head. I don't have words for what you just did. What we just did, Rowan corrected, moving into his arms with the ease of someone who'd found her home. We stopped apologizing for who we are and started demanding recognition for what we can build together. Heath cupped her face in his hands, studying the woman who'd walked into his life by accident and stayed by choice. I love you, he said simply. Not because you're brilliant at your job or because you make me want to be better, though you do both those things. I love you because you see possibilities where other people see problems, even when the problems include nosy ex-fiancés and judgmental society pages, Rowan teased, her eyes dancing with mischief. Especially then. Heath's kiss was soft, sure, full of promises about foundations they would build together. Besides, I have it on good authority that the best relationships start with sitting at the wrong table. And as afternoon sunlight streamed through the boardroom windows, illuminating the city that sprawled beneath them, Rowan and Heath began planning not just buildings that would change neighborhoods, but a future that would prove love and ambition weren't opposites. They were the perfect foundation for everything worth building. 2 years later, they would return to the same restaurant where it all began, but this time there would be no confusion about which table was theirs. The Lower East Side Community Center buzzed with the controlled chaos of a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Children darted between adults in their Sunday best, while photographers captured moments that would grace the community newsletter and architectural magazines in equal measure. The building rose 6 stories into the October sky, its red brick facade and green courtyards already feeling like they'd been part of the neighborhood forever. Rowan stood at the edge of the crowd watching Sophia, Elena's daughter, now 12 and full of opinions about everything, practice her ribbon-cutting speech for the 5th time. The girl who'd once asked if Rowan would disappear like other developers now served as the official community representative, a role she took with the seriousness of someone who understood that promises kept were precious things. Nervous? Heath appeared beside her, offering her a cup of coffee from the bodega across the street, the same one that had supplied her morning caffeine throughout the entire design process. Terrified, Rowan admitted, accepting the familiar comfort of his presence. What if it doesn't work? What if the community spaces sit empty, or the income integration creates tension instead of connection? Heath studied her face, noting the way she unconsciously twisted the simple diamond ring on her left hand, a habit she'd developed since he'd proposed 3 months ago in her old studio apartment, surrounded by architectural models and takeout containers. Do you see Mrs. Santos over there? He nodded toward the elderly woman who was directing teenagers and hanging banners with the efficiency of a general commanding troops. She's organizing the Halloween party for next week. Mixed income, mixed ages, completely voluntary. His smile was soft with satisfaction. And Marcus? Rowan followed his gaze to the young man, now 19 and a sophomore at Columbia's engineering program, who was explaining the building's sustainable systems to a reporter with the confidence of someone who'd helped design them. He's moving into one of the study apartments next month. Full scholarship, part-time job in our apprenticeship program, and Sophia's unofficial big brother. Heath's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining with the practiced ease of 2 years together. Your community integration didn't just work, Rowan. It created something that will outlast both of us. The ceremony itself was a blur of speeches, applause, and the satisfying snip of scissors through red ribbon. But it was the moment afterward, when families began exploring their new community center. Children claimed the playground equipment, and teenagers gravitated toward the study spaces designed just for them. That made Rowan's chest tight with emotion. Ms. Rowan! Sophia appeared at her elbow, slightly breathless from excitement. Come see the kitchen. Mama Elena wants to show you the first empanadas made in the community commercial space. They followed Sophia through hallways that smelled like fresh paint and possibility, past the childcare cooperative where working parents were already coordinating schedules, around the workshop where Mr. Santos was teaching a 10-year-old how to sand wood properly. In the community kitchen, Elena stood at a professional-grade stove, her face glowing with pride as she lifted golden empanadas from hot oil. The space buzzed with activity. 3 other residents testing recipes they hoped to turn into small businesses. Teenagers learning knife skills from a retired chef who lived in 4B. Try this, Elena insisted, pressing a still warm empanada into Rowan's hands. First batch made in our new kitchen. Historic moment. The pastry was perfect, flaky crust giving way to seasoned beef and vegetables, but it was the joy on Elena's face that made Rowan's eyes water. This woman who'd dreamed of expanding beyond her apartment kitchen now stood in a space designed around her ambitions, surrounded by neighbors who'd become collaborators. It's perfect, Rowan managed, her voice thick with emotion. You're crying, Heath observed, his own eyes suspiciously bright. Happy tears, she insisted, though she couldn't explain why seeing her architectural drawings transformed into lived community felt so overwhelming. Later, as the celebration wound down and residents claimed keys to apartments they could afford in a neighborhood they loved, Heath and Rowan found themselves alone on the building's rooftop garden. The space was smaller than the renderings had suggested, but more beautiful. Vegetables growing in neat rows beside wildflowers, benches positioned to catch morning sun and evening breezes. Remember the first time you told me about breathing spaces? Heath asked, settling beside her on a bench that faced downtown Manhattan. Vaguely. I was terrified and caffeinated and probably talking too fast. You said good design could transform not just structures but lives. He turned to face her fully. Do you think we did that? Rowan looked down at the courtyard below where children played games that crossed language barriers while their parents chatted over coffee from thermoses. Tomorrow, Marcus would host study groups in spaces designed for concentration. Next week, Elena would teach cooking classes to neighbors who'd become friends. I think we built something better than I knew how to dream, she said quietly. You pushed me to think bigger, to demand more, to never settle for good enough when extraordinary was possible. She echoed her own words from the boardroom confrontation that had changed everything. This project wouldn't exist without your vision of what wealth could accomplish when it's used right. Heath was quiet for a moment, watching the city lights begin to twinkle in the growing dusk. My father built buildings that lasted, but you've built something that will matter. We built something that will matter, Rowan corrected. Together. The conversation that followed was the kind couples have when they're building futures instead of just sharing present moments. About the national expansion of their community integration model, about the wedding they were planning for next spring, about the small architectural firm Rowan had started that was already fielding requests from cities across the country. Can I ask you something? Rowan said as they prepared to leave, the building settling into evening quiet around them. Anything. That first day, when I sat at your table by mistake, she paused, searching for the right words. Did you know? Even a little bit? Heath considered the question seriously. I knew you were different. I knew you made me want to listen instead of talk, which never happens to me. I knew that for the first time in years I was curious about something that wasn't a balance sheet. But did you know I would change everything? His smile was soft, certain, full of the contentment that comes from finding exactly what you never knew you were looking for. I knew that if I let you walk away, I'd spend the rest of my life wondering what might have happened if I'd been brave enough to find out. And as they walked hand in hand through the neighborhood that had become their shared legacy, past the bodega where Rowan still bought coffee and the community center where children would grow up believing their dreams could become blueprints, they both understood that the best love stories aren't about finding your perfect match. They're about finding someone worth building something extraordinary with, one foundation stone at a time. What would you have done in Rowan's position? Would you have had the courage to fight for your place in a world that questioned your every move? Or would you have walked away when the pressure became too much? Share your thoughts. Have you ever found yourself at the wrong table that turned out to be exactly where you needed to be? Your participation in this channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.